Live? I'm super curious. Wait, is it live? Hold on. I'm gonna be so mad if this oh, it's actually working! Oh my gosh, this is a miracle. Now all we have to see is if, oh, I can hear myself. Oh yeah. Wait, how can I can hear myself twice. How is this possible? Oh, we're live with an echo. Darn it! Why are we live with an echo? All right, let's see, Sersa. We're gonna kick this into gear here and see if we can actually fix the echo. Let me see. I need to hire someone to do this for me next time, Sersa. All right. Does anyone else hear an echo? Do you hear it?
No, you sound great to me.
Wow, yeah, you sound great to me too, Sersa. I don't know. I don't actually hear an echo. Now there's an echo. Slight echo only. I suspect user error. You suspect correct. Um,
People are actually talking to you. They can hear us. Is that what's going on?
I guess so. That's better than not being able to hear us. I wonder if I mute one of my mics. Slight echo. It's mild, but it's there. Okay. Okay.
Me too.
Let me see if I can mute. This is why we can have nice things. What if I mute this? Can you guys hear me still? Can you hear me, Sersa?
I can.
You can? I
Hmm.
wonder if chat can hear me. Oh, Lucas Corte is in our chat right now, who's a really fantastic artist. Um, Not sure I can hear you, just your echo. Just my echo? Gosh darn it.
It's very profound, honestly.
Wait, did we fix it? Maybe we fixed it. Much better? Oh, thank goodness. I think I know what was happening. I think I know what was happening. Okay, wow. Look at this. Sersa is like a good luck charm because this is probably the least technically messed up stream that I've ever initiated. So
We're doing it.
awesome. Oh my gosh. Well, everybody, welcome. Hello. Oh, we have hello from Ireland. Oh, echo is gone. Oh, this is wonderful. Okay. This is so cool. Sersa is our guest today on the channel, as I have been talking about this week. And Sersa's a super award-winning adventure writer, someone I've admired forever, since even before right when I started publishing, I knew about your work, Sersa, and I've been following your advice, and we had spoken, we had done an interview together, a written interview, right? Many years ago at this point.
Yeah.
And I turned it into a document that I'm still sharing out to my mailing list. And so I have to reshare that to everybody because I think it's
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah, yeah. And it was
Yeah.
about adventure design and about your experience as a writer. And do you want to kick us off by telling us? I know you probably hate bragging about yourself because you're so humble, but do you want to give us some highlights of some of the amazing things that you've done? And do not be humble because you you deserve some credit for everything you've done. What's
I
your
appreciate that.
resume?
Well, first, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I've been really looking forward to this. As I mentioned before the stream, I was freaking out all morning. It's going to be so much fun. Um, yeah, so for those who don't know me, my name is Sersa Victory. I've been a tabletop RPG designer since 2008. So I think that's 15 years? Oh, God. I feel like I just aged, like a mummy just touched me. Yeah, I got my start writing blog posts and articles for Kobold Quarterly. That's what it was called before it became Kobold Press. Wrote for their blog and their magazine. I also self-published my own material. And to make a very long story short, the through line is that my work focuses on tournament dungeon crawls and death trap dungeon crawls, right? So all the material is inspired by modules like the Tomb of Horrors, which is a poster behind me, things like Hidden Shrine of Tomoe-chan, which we'll talk about a little bit in today's talk. I also do instruction. So I teach with a site called Storytelling Collective, which is run by Ashley Warren, who you might know as one of the authors of Rime of the Frost Maiden, a number of other really, really great projects. She's amazing to work with. I've been teaching there for about 4 years now, including the Dungeon Design Essentials series, which we'll talk about a little bit. Write a little bit of fiction, and I do game programming as well. Just a lot of very sort of creative work, but around this idea of the obstacle course dungeon, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that was a very, very short condensation of what I do. But like, you're right, I really kind of struggle to talk about it in a way that like doesn't come off as self-aggrandizing. But no, I'm glad to be here.
It's very hard to like toot your own horn, so to speak. So I totally get it, which is, you know, it's always nice when I was like, maybe if I was allowed to, I would just read off your entire like list of awards and be like, Sersa's done all of this. Like, one thing people may not know, which I've sometimes mentioned, you've won an adventure design contest like that was run by Wizards of the Coast. Like, Chris Perkins gave you the award, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, that was probably, gosh, maybe 10, 11 years ago at this point. It was a while ago. It was kind of towards the start of my career. It was called Apprentice of Asarak. And if I remember, it was a series of blog posts where he was kind of waxing nostalgic about, again, Tomb of Horrors and thinking about what can be pulled forward into the design they were doing. He ran a contest where you had to design the map for an adventure. So it was interesting in that you weren't able to submit a full adventure. You had to create the map and then annotate the map and then send it in to him. And if he found the adventure like compelling and interesting just by looking at the map, then that was kind of his criteria. So he picked, I think, 5 finalists from who knows how many. And then the community got to vote on it. And I won the award. I got the title of Apprentice of Asarak, which was a lot of fun.
That is amazing. Yeah, I would put that on my business card practically.
I've tried. People are just like, this seems strange.
What is this?
Yeah. But I'm also like, I guess now that I'm in the mode of talking about those sorts of things, I won an ENNIE this year for Shrine of the Jaguar Princess, my Shadowdark module, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Original print of it.
Oh. So that'll be that's a collector's item at this point.
I know, I love it.
I was nominated for some design work in the past, so even though Jaguar Princess was my first solo win, I've been nominated for ENNIEs a couple times, and I've contributed to projects that won through Kobold Press and Storytelling Collective, but I usually don't count those because that was, my slice was not super big on a lot of those. But hopefully, today we can kind of talk through some adventure design concepts. I'm really mostly excited to hear what people's questions are about adventure design, and if I can add value for people and give them some ideas on what they might do for their own adventures.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you can. You've definitely added value for me with your writings and the interviews we've done in the past. I sometimes still refer back to things you've said when I'm looking for ways to like break myself out of like a stuck spot or ways to advance something I'm working on. So, well, awesome. Okay, so everybody, you have a pro here on the line, so I'm hoping people are coming up with some questions. And I think, so maybe we can start off with, if I can sling some questions that are like relevant to adventure design, especially with your work recently with Shadowdark. So you have an approach to writing that it seems very inspired by tournament style dungeons, which I don't know if everybody knows the history of those. But like Tomb of Horrors is kind of the classic example.
Right.
But I think maybe to give folks a brief primer, like tournament style dungeons were sort of in like the early to late TSR era, where they were designed for people to sit down at conventions and try to play through knowing that it was like kind of a one shot, and they were really deadly. And I think by today's standards, it could almost be seen as like super harsh and like punitive, but the point was to try to play smart. And you bring that into your design in such a cool way that's not just like, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead. Like, you have such a cool way of making things dangerous, but making the players have a choice involved in almost everything. So with that long intro, I would love to start off by like talking to you about how do you create these dungeons that have such incredible interlocking parts, because each room is enhanced by the other rooms that might be like distant from it. For example, like you have such a
Yeah,
good way of making the whole dungeon interact with itself. Like, what's your philosophy on that?
that's a great question. I think I'll start with where my game design inspiration kind of led to that. Um, I've talked about this in other streams I've done, so I apologize if folks are like, you're telling the story again. But, my introduction to fantasy when I was younger wasn't really in fiction. Like, I was a late comer. I didn't read Tolkien until like later in high school. Um, my intro to fantasy was the computer game Hexen, which was essentially a fantasy reskin of Doom, right? And what's interesting about those games is that they're very deliberately abstract in their level design. So they feel less like real places that people would inhabit, like in the case of Doom, real military bases, or in the case of Hexen, like castles and fortresses and churches. They're obstacle courses. And that abstract level design is something that I kind of carry over into my dungeon design, for better and for worse, because I think there are some people who will play through it and it's very clearly not a place that would actually exist. It's like, why would they put this thing here? It seems like it only exists for gameplay purposes. And my answer is yes, that's correct. Like, this is a fantasy obstacle course. There's nothing wrong with doing um, simulation style adventures. There's, people can enjoy different things and people can enjoy the same thing. Sometimes you're in the mood for one and not the other. But the idea is, and I warned you before the stream, I'm going to dive into some academic stuff. So if I get too dry or too boring, please do reel me back in. There's this framework that game designers use, mostly in video games, but I think it applies here. It's called the MDA framework. So mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics, right? And the framework is a way for you to take a look at the game mechanics that you've designed and evaluate whether they're going to lead to the experience that you want the players to have. And the A part of that acronym, aesthetics, these are sort of the different play experiences, the different moods that you can create with your game. So there's things like games as make-believe, right? Games as a narrative, so you're telling a story. In my case, what the aesthetic that I go for is game as obstacle course, right? And so the idea is, let's create something where the mechanics, by their design, lead to this feeling of challenge, of leading to an obstacle course feeling, at the expense sometimes of things like simulation or storytelling. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And, I was thinking about this before the stream, and each different element of the modules that I create has its own process. And it's kind of an elaborate process. So I can dig into it a little bit more if people want to ask about it. But the idea is that the thread that joins everything together is this concept that I call iconic dungeon crawling moments, right? So let me see, probably the best way that I can describe it is, when I started out doing dungeon design, I think like a lot of people, I was kind of freestyling it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You sit down and you might have like a vibe, you might have an intuition on what you want to do. But I think a lot of people have this experience where they are sitting and they've got their graph paper or they have Google Docs open and they're just like, what do I do? Maybe I've got a cool idea. Oh, maybe I'll put a pit trap here because that seems fun. But the problem that I was running into was that it's an inefficient way to design, because you're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and you're hoping that the desired experience, the desired aesthetic, falls out of that experience, right? Falls out of those designs. And so, what I wanted to do was really dial in on what is it that's fun about the Death Trap dungeon and the tournament dungeon. Because there's this really great book that I think changed my thinking on this, and it's called Rules of Play, Game Design Fundamentals by Salen and Zimmerman. It's extremely long, extremely dense, but you can find it online in PDF. And one of the things that they talk about, and I read this a couple of years ago, and I was in the midst of this like I don't know what I'm doing, right? I'm just kind of putting stuff out there and hoping that it does what I want it to do, but I didn't know if things worked. I didn't know why, and I couldn't reproduce it reliably. Um, and so they talk about in rules of play that game design is a second order design problem. And it's like, what the hell does that mean? A
Yeah, what does
second order
that
design problem.
mean? Yeah.
So it's a fancy way to basically say that as game designers, we don't design the player's experience directly. Like if I have an experience that I want you to have, I can't take it and like force it into your brain, right? All we can really do as game designers is design rules, design systems, design mechanics from which that desired play experience emerges. So as Salen and Zimmerman say, we are only designing play experiences indirectly, right? And so from there, I thought to myself, okay, I mean, that makes sense, but what is the desired play experience really? Like, what does it even mean to design for a play experience? And so from there, I spent a little bit of time making a list of what I called the iconic dungeon crawling moments. So if you can think of a play experience basically as a series of moments, and as a designer, you know, the goal should be to maximize the moments that are fun, that are memorable, that are sort of, again, iconic, like we sit down to play these adventures because you want to have these moments while minimizing the boring ones, right? So part of that research was sitting down and looking at stuff that worked in previous modules, looking at what made other modules successful, talking to my friends and saying, hey, you know, tell me about a recent adventure that you played that was a lot of fun, and listening for the things that they dialed in on, like, oh, this particular thing or this particular thing. And at the end of it, I came up with a list of about 16 of these very sort of high level moments that include things like the hard choice, the dramatic roll, the foreshadow, the circumvention, the rescue, the narrow escape, right? And this is where we kind of get back to this MDA thing that I was talking about, is rather than trying to design based on intuition, which isn't a wholly bad thing. I think people can have good intuitions, but rather than relying on that and freestyling each module, every single element that I design in a module, whether it's a monster, trap, magic item, whatever, has to be inflected through one of those moments. So I actually have with me here a little, you can see a little piece of paper that I have. This is a tiny version of some handouts that I have in my storytelling collective courses. So if you really want to do a deep dive into moments, there's actually a course just for that you can take at your own pace. But let's say I'm designing a trap, right? And actually, do you have any dice on you? We can probably roll some dice.
I have some dice. Does the audience have oh, but it might be delayed. I have some dice, sir, so let's roll some dice.
Sure.
What should I roll?
Sorry. So what I need from you, let's say we're using kind of the random generator, maybe in the Shadowdark book, maybe in you know, your system of choice, and it says there's a trap in this room, right? So what I would typically do, give me a D4 and a D6, and tell me the results separately.
We've got our D4, I got a 1, and a D6, I got a 4.
So this would be gas or dust, right? So this room is going to have some kind of gas or dust trap in it. Now, for newer designers, they may struggle to go, okay, what do I do with this? Like, okay, maybe it's a trap. It does ongoing damage or does constitution damage. And for me, before I even get to those specifics, I go, what is the iconic dungeon crawling moment that this trap is going to encourage, right? Like it's going to be the mechanic, the M in that MDA framework. And through its dynamics, the D, right? That means the runtime behaviors of the game. So when you sit down and play a game, how do the mechanics actually sort of work together, right? And what kind of player behaviors do they encourage? So what I would normally do is I would go to the back of this one here, go ahead and roll me a D4 and a D6 again. All
right. The D4 is 4. The D6 is 3.
Oh, so this is a glorious death moment. Yeah, so one of the iconic dungeon crawling moments, and this is a bit more specific for Death Trap dungeons, is that, you know, if death is going to be common, it has to be one of 3 things in my mind, right? It has to either be engaging, it has to be spectacular, or it has to be rewarding, or a mixture of all three, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in the case of the glorious death moment, this gas trap or this dust trap, it would be, some kind of damaging effect or perhaps even a save or die effect, but it can't stop there. What it has to do is, okay, what can I do to make this gas trap have a spectacular death? So it's like so over the top. I'll give you an example from a game I ran a couple nights ago where I'm playtesting a module and they fought a headless white dragon skeleton with like a gravity heart. There's like a piece of the moon.
Whoa.
At the start of the adventure, or at the start of the battle, it tries to pull everybody in with gravity. So I'm like, everybody make a saving throw to resist being pulled in. And one of the players rolled a natural 1.
Ooh.
And so what happened was he was so affected by the gravity that he basically became like stringified and was like sucked into the black hole of the gravity well.
So
And,
cool.
it was brutal, but you're never going to forget that death, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to probably throw a lot of books out there in today's chat, so I can provide like links if people want to check them out
Oh
afterwards,
yeah.
put them in Discord or something.
I would love to
A
put the
little reading
links
list.
in the comments after the fact too to all this. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a book called The Art of Failure. It's called An Essay on the Pain of Playing Video Games by Jesper Juul, Juul. Again, another book that's a bit more focused on video games, but it talks about this paradox of failure in games, right? Where we, as human beings, we don't like discomfort. We avoid discomfort. We avoid failure, and yet failure is what draws us into games. And like we willingly subject ourselves to something where we fail over and over again. We don't have to do that. And one of the things he talks about is the way that you can make failure palatable. He uses the phrase replace frustration with curiosity. So he's talking a bit more about like performance oriented games or sports or esports or things like that, where it's like, okay, if I screwed up, what can I do to see this as a learning opportunity? So in the case of roguelikes, that's really popular. Like, what did I do wrong in my strategy? But in the case of tabletop RPGs, I took that and said, okay, how can we make death, either spectacular, create like being sucked into the black hole of a headless white dragon heart, or rewarding or engaging in some way. So I often include consolation prize deaths in
Ah.
modules. There's an example of this in one of my more recent Shadowdark modules, Caldera of the Sickle Dancer, where there's this kind of brutal trap where it drops this cage around you when you're grabbing this artifact called the Bowl of Sacred Baby Teeth, right? And it descends into the magma chamber, and it just get burned up. But one of the things I wanted to do was, again, I wanted to make this a glorious death. I wanted to make it, one of the three things that I described. And so when the platform raises back up out of the magma, the slain character's skull is still there. It's completely, devoid of hair and skin, but it's still there. It's steaming and it's whispering. And if the players pick it up and listen to it like a seashell, it reveals to them the truth or falsity of a rumor that they've heard about the dungeon, right?
Oh.
So, yeah. So even though the character was killed, and that can be, for some players, a frustrating experience, the hope is, following Jesper Juul's lead, we can replace that frustration with curiosity or engagement or humor, or, some interesting effect. So I kind of went on a tangent there from that. But you can see, like, that's kind of the process that I take for the vast majority of the design work I do. So Shrine of the Jaguar Princess, for example, was almost entirely procedurally generated in this way. So not in like a chat GPT, like I told it to write it for me, but rather I have tons and tons of tables like this that all link up to these different sort of theories and frameworks, and it produces the scaffolding of the adventure. And then a lot of my work is taking these elements and blending them together and reifying them into actual concrete things in the module, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's so interesting because I think there are sort of two schools of writer, and I think that we all bounce between them a little bit. Like there's the seat of the pants type, I'm going to just sit down and see what happens, and then there's the meticulously planning, or I wouldn't even say meticulously planning. It's more like I feel like people come to build frameworks for themselves Which I have a little bit of that too with when I design adventures, but I think that when you want to be very intentional about how you're designing something, you have to rely on frameworks, because those are what you know will produce the result that you want. So it's so fascinating that you have kind of developed these for yourself and come to these, to checking your designs and encounters against what you want a result to be that you know is going to be a satisfying gameplay experience. So I think there's so much wisdom in that, and it actually maybe you can tell me your thoughts on this too, but having this set of frameworks for yourself actually makes designing, I think it makes it easier, because you're not just slamming your head against the wall saying, oh, I can't come up with anything genius enough right now. So how do you find that helps you with your writing?
I think you're spot on. I mean, it's the reason I've been able to write coming on 7 Shadowdark modules like since the Kickstarter launched, right? And all of them have done reasonably well and have been received well. It's because, to go back to what we talked about earlier, I don't spend a whole lot of time in that sort of analysis paralysis, like blank graph paper problem, right? Which I did for many, many years. It's like when I sit down, I have a complete end-to-end process. So I know at every step of the way, what do I need to design at this point? How do I design it? What goes here? How should these elements interlink? And where the fun of it is taking these abstract concepts, like it's a trap that does a, narrow escape moment, and turning that into something that meets the theme of the dungeon, right? And so I don't spend a whole lot of time. I'm never stuck. I always know kind of basically what mechanics I need to design to get to the desired aesthetic experience, right? Part of it too is just doing it for 15 years, and you just get, into the habit. Like I'm a big believer in practice, right? And seeing every module as a practice session. This is something I stole from a fiction workshop I took, because I also write a little bit of fiction. And the thing that really got me out of my jam there, because I was really, really bad until recently about like sitting down, and it would take me like a year to write a short story.
Wow, yeah. Wow.
Because a lot of it was just me psyching myself out, because you want to be perfect. And it's like, this has to be the best short story ever written. And if it's not, I'm going to lose my mind. But the thing that this author told me, Dean Wesley Smith, who's probably the most prolific author living today, like it's just unbelievable how much he writes. He says every single thing I write is a practice session. And that's the way that I see it. It's like you have to kind of lose in some way this ego about the things that you write and see them as very precious. Like you do the best you can when you're creating them, but you want to get away from what he calls this book as event, where it's like, I've written a module and now everybody has to hear about it, and I have to do all of this pomp and circumstance around it.
Right.
But for me, it's like, no, they're just practice sessions. Like every module that I write, I pick like one area that I think I could probably do better at, and I try to focus on that. And then I use this process and maybe refine the process each time. As soon as the module's done, I put it up on Itch or I put it up on Lulu, and I never look at it again unless I'm running it.
Yeah.
And I move right on to the next project, because I've had my fun with it, right? But I don't think of them as like these precious things that have to be very, very like, shouted from the rooftops, and they have to be perfect. Like I know for a fact, even in Jaguar Princess, because I'm going through, I might hijack this to make a little fun announcement I haven't told anybody yet, but this, hopefully around the holiday time, there will be a special edition version of Shrine of the Jaguar Princess with all new custom art, and it's going to have a complete like design commentary section and a bonus gauntlet. And it's going to be in this super dope like new cover. It's going to be case wrapped hardcover. It's going to be super cool.
I'm so excited for that.
Yeah. But going back to it and rereading it to do the layout, I'm seeing things that I would probably do differently, even though the module was written about 6 months ago, like it was originally written that long ago. And I have to let that be the way it is, right? It's like, that's kind of the post along the road. That's where I was as a designer 6 months ago. There's things I'm hopefully a little bit better at now. And you just kind of leave it be, right? I don't know if that was super helpful, but it's just, it's getting out of your own head, because I feel that's 90% of productivity with writing is just letting yourself letting like there's an author, Nina Kariki Hoffman, like one of the most celebrated like fantasy authors. And
We're listening intently.
amazing. Um, she has this phrase, dare to be bad, which basically means it takes a tremendous amount of courage to put something out there, knowing that it'll probably not be perfect and people aren't going to like it. People might even say mean things to you about it, right?
Yes. And we've
Um,
all been there, right? I mean, I think every single
yeah.
person who's published something has had someone say something super harsh about it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, 100%. Um, it takes more courage to do that than it does to simply say, well, you know what? I'm just not going to put anything out there at all.
Yes.
Um, but the flip side of that is, don't be afraid to put stuff out that's imperfect because it's probably better than you think it is. You give yourself credit for.
Yes.
Writers are the worst judge of their own work. If it isn't perfect, people don't really care that much in a lot of ways. And again, everything's just a practice session. Can't get too hung up on a single module. Like just have fun with the process and just be cool, I guess.
It's true. Just like let it ride. Well, I really think that's valuable advice because I'm sure so many people have not published something or thought to themselves, like, I could never publish something because they're either worried about maybe getting critiqued, which I guess, like, not every critique is one that one needs to listen to. There are some that you do and some that you don't. So that's the first thing. Like, not everybody's gonna like what someone does, and you just have to be able to see which kind of critique it is. So I hope that never stops anybody. But it's also, the idea of I think I have also experienced this where I'm like, gosh, I'm afraid I'm gonna look back on this in a year and like be embarrassed about it,
Yeah.
which I can't say that I've, but like, there's nothing I've published that I'm like, oh, this is absolutely horrible. I can't believe I published this. But like you, I do look back on things and I'm like, oh, I think that I've learned how to do this better, or I think I would have done it differently now. And that doesn't mean that the adventures aren't fun for people or the material isn't fun for people to use. People still get value out of it, but there's no way to improve unless you actually put yourself out there and do these things. Yeah. Yeah. So it's tricky. Sorry about my dog, by the way. She's
It's okay.
It's probably not the last time she will bark during this. I'm so sorry, everybody. But yeah, well, okay. So Sersa, this is one thing too that I was curious about, kind of in this same angle. When you're writing and you're using these frameworks, now you have a framework that sort of lends itself to the style of dungeon that you write, and you write like almost tournament style death trap dungeons where maybe if someone dies, it's not like they can't keep playing. They might be able to bring another character in or something. So what advice might you have for people who want to create or like draw from the frameworks out there, like the ones that you teach people and stuff? Like, how could someone go about starting to create a collection of methods for themselves, for their design?
That's a really good question. I think the first thing I would say to people is sit down and really try to get clear about the experience that you're actually trying to create. And again, with this fly and the
Animals everywhere.
yeah, the process for getting there. So, I've had people ask me, can I use like moment driven design for a non-death trap dungeon? The answer is absolutely yes. Because all you're really doing is you're sitting down and going, I have a play experience I want to create. What are the discrete moments during that play experience that I want to try to encourage, and what are the ones I want to discourage, right? And then how do I actually go about, in very concrete terms, designing something that encourages those? So I have an example here, actually. I can't share my screen, but if you indulge me,
Can I set it up for you to
because
be?
I have a bunch of, we didn't need to, this should only take a few seconds,
Cool.
but this is material in my online courses about moments. And when I was sitting down to do this thing I'm asking people to do, like, okay, think about what those iconic dungeon crawling moments are, or what the iconic play experience is, and then how to design things. Here's what I mean by that. So I have traps pulled up here on my computer. And so we have something like the dramatic roll, right? A very, very common iconic dungeon crawling moment. Reading from the text here, the game master or player makes a die roll in the open, the result of which has dramatic or lethal consequences, right? I think we've all experienced that. It's those moments where the GM is like, I got this D20 here. I'm going to make this roll, and uh, these are the stakes for it. And in fact, I joked on another podcast that my players hate the Shadowdark Wandering monster checks in the best way possible because I completely like ham it up. Like I pull up, I have a D6, and I'm like, it's been 3 turns. You know the rule. I'm going to roll this D6 on the roll of a 1. It's going to be a random encounter. And legitimately, like every single time when I roll that and they see it's not a 1, they're just like,
We're doomed.
yeah, you can just feel the tension. But basically, the dramatic roll is one of these iconic moments that when people sit down to play, uh, a dungeon module. That's going to apply to other styles as well, but to play a dungeon module, that's one of them. And so I sat down and made basically these bullet points about, okay, if I want to design a trap to create a dramatic roll moment to encourage, right? Because we can't, again, it's a second order design problem. I can't like guarantee that this thing I design is going to do this, but I can create the conditions for it, right? Mm-hmm. The dynamics, the runtime behaviors of this trap will hopefully get me to the aesthetic I want. So I have written down here, designing a trap for the dramatic roll moment. So a trap could choose its targets or zone of effect randomly each turn by rolling a die. A trap activates its most powerful attack mode only if a certain result is rolled on a die in the open, right? Has a powerful effect. It requires a target to make a saving throw to avoid instant death or some other calamity. A very powerful trap, can be disabled or even exploited if a player makes a skill check with a very high target number. Potentially dispenses a reward on a certain die roll. So basically, like when I'm sitting down and designing traps, but also monsters, puzzles, areas, I mean, I have basically just all of this stuff written down, and anybody can access these through my online course. But I go, okay, I have this gas trap and it's got to do this dramatic roll. Let me pick one of these bullet points and then work from there, mm-hmm. right? And this process could work for any style, provided you kind of break down what are those moments, and then you just do this thought exercise with yourself, or you practice and make notes as you're running an adventure of like, okay, what can I do with a trap to create, X moment that I've come up with for my specific style, right? Whether that's role-playing focused or whatever you want to do. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I feel like it's really interesting to hear that frameworks are so important to how you do stuff, because sometimes I feel like it's almost like cheating, because I do this too, where I feel like, oh well, I've over time developed lists of elements and things that I want in adventures, and then I'm pulling from them a lot. But it is funny because it feels almost like you're somehow gaming the system by having these pre-planned things, but what you're doing is building upon a scaffold that is going to work. And so yeah, I don't think anyone from the outside it would be a really interesting exercise for someone to try to reverse engineer like how you did an adventure based on what design elements you wanted in it.
Yeah.
Which I think it'd be really cool if that makes its way into some of your commentary in the updated version. I feel like it probably will.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because there's so much to learn from that, and it's like I would encourage anyone listening to if they haven't done this, based off of the advice Sersa is giving us, is the next time you run a game, try to note down the highlights, the high moments in the game, and identify what was it that led to that. Was it the dramatic die roll? Was it because a character was faced with a choice between letting something important happen or sacrificing something, and identifying what those are so people can make their own lists too of these kinds of things. So that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so on that topic, I'm really, I guess, like, as by way of example, do you have something that you've been designing that you can think of recently where you really had to, like, dig deep on this process and solve some problems and kind of grapple with it?
That's a good question. So let me think about that for a second.
Yeah.
I just put out a gauntlet not too long ago for Shadowdark. I'm trying to think if there's anything. Oh, here's a great example. So there's a trap at the very beginning of the gauntlet where there is this portal, and what you have to do basically is get like two like Indiana Jones style like crystal staffs, and so that the light will shine through into the portal and make the archway safe, right? Now there's a fake staff somewhere in the dungeon, and if they don't catch on to the fact that it's fake and try to use it and put it in that statue, something bad happens, right? So that's another example of where I think a lot of designers can get stuck because they go, okay, I know there should be some kind of punishment here, some kind of trap, and so they might reach for, the very intuitive, easy approach. It's like, okay, maybe it blows up and deals damage or something like that. But because the process that I use, I procedurally generate, like I roll on tables like this, tell me what the scaffolding is. For that one, I rolled, like what do I have here? Oh, I have a list of 24 trap effects, right? And they're not specific. So it's not like it shoots fire or it's poisonous, but they're things like block off a shortcut, escape route, or optional area, make a previously safe area unsafe, unleash a new danger in the game later, or worsen anything, like stuff like that, right? And so for that one, I had rolled essentially threaten the players with another effect on this list in X amount of time, right? And so what I did with that trap was when I put the wrong staff in, I'm like, okay, it can do damage as a base, that's fine, but it needs to do something more than that. It has to do this effect of threatening the players with something after a certain amount of time or turns, which is actually one of the iconic dungeon crawling moments, the narrow escape, right? There's like, oh, we just managed to get through this in a certain amount of time. So what happens is you put the fake staff in, it shoots the beam of light, but rather than activating the portal, it actually sets the contents of the chamber to which the portal leads on fire, because they're like fire staffs. And you announce to the players, you can see through the portal. You can't pass through it because it'll kill you if you go through the portal, but you can see in this dim gray fog that this mummy's chamber and all of this mummy queen's like treasure and grave goods, it's on fire. And in 30 minutes of real time, if you can't find a way to solve this puzzle the right way and rescue that treasure, it's all gone.
Ooh, that's so good. That is like hitting on a different level because, right, that's like you're really trying to leverage things that you know are going to make the players want to respond to this, and like
that's right.
That's some advanced trap awesomeness right there. I absolutely love that. Oh my gosh, everyone, look out if you play one of Sersa. You're gonna have to be smart. And one thing, and I'll just throw this out as an aside, one thing that I appreciate so much in your writing is that you don't go easy on the players for sure, but you know they have resources to answer the questions that they might have. Like, nobody uses divination spells, and I feel like in your adventures they would be wise to because it can really help them.
100%.
And I love that you work in ways to make things like some of these corners of the game have their moment to shine that I think get so sometimes neglected. Like I was just revisiting some of your work right before we were talking, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the players have to know to do a specific action in a specific way, and they do have the resources to find out how to do that. They just have to be careful about it, and it's very cool. Yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned that. I have a little like related tip before I dive into another point I wanted to make. With tournament dungeons and killer dungeons in particular, one of the things you'll see a lot, including in things like Tomb of Horrors, is that to create the feeling of challenge, they often shut down things like divination. So you might see this where it's like if characters try to use augury, it doesn't work. Or if they try to teleport, it doesn't work, right? And so as a little like side tip, one of the things that I try to do is flip it on its head and go, rather than just completely saying no to those things, design your dungeons such that the players are encouraged and in some cases required to do those things if they want to succeed, and then make the use of those dramatic or interesting or risky, right? So an example would be if I were redoing Tomb of Horrors, rather than saying, well, you know what, teleportation, it can be kind of a short circuit for some of the challenges, so I'm just going to shut that down, which is frustrating because, and I think you even call this out in the Shadowdark rulebook, that you need to honor the player's investment, right? So if they invested in, am I getting that right? Honor their investment?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. where it's like if they put the points into being able to teleport and augur and things like that, that you need to honor that commitment. And so what you can do is go, okay, you can teleport, and in fact, I'm going to design maybe special optional areas where if they think to use teleport, they can get into a secret room and get extra treasure. And if they want to use teleport in other situations, how can I make the use of that teleportation a interesting, dramatic trade-off? Maybe there's a risk associated with it or a cost. But what you're doing is you're kind of, again, it's kind of a little bonus tip, but think about the things that you would normally prohibit to sort of preserve the integrity of the module's challenges and instead flip it on its head and go, what if I just steer into that? Does that make sense?
Yes, that's such good advice. And that's like one of the best ways to make characters happy about some of the choices that they made that would otherwise it's a shame when things like teleport are totally shut down, like you can't gate or whatever, and there are ways to think yourself through those problems and turn them into fun things that the players will enjoy actually getting to solve using their skills and powers. It's such a good call out. That's something I hope every game designer picks at as a problem. Like
Yeah,
how can I make divination actually cool here and even necessary or really useful? So all that. Yeah.
yeah. It allows you to, there's and I apologize for so many books, but there's just a lot of really great resources out there. There's a book called You Said This Would, it's always a mouthful. You Said This Would Be Fun, How to Make a Good Game and How to Make a Game Good. I think I flipped those around. But You Said This Would Be Fun is the main title of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's by Jeff Warrender. And what he does is he describes a number of high level skills that games challenge. Now that's, important for me because as I'm designing primarily, game as obstacle course, to go back to the MDA framework, challenge design is something I need to be very, very good at if I want to be successful in my modules. And he talks about these different skills. And one of the skills that he describes that good games challenge, or two of them rather, is prioritization and optimization. So prioritization being I have limited resources and you test the players to prioritize who gets those resources, when to use those resources, what can we afford to give up, what can we afford to keep, for how long do we keep it. Optimization is similar, identifying, the ideal situation. So obviously, like I have spells and they're limited, or I have a potion, and I need to make sure I identify the best opportunity to use that. What you're doing when you kind of, embrace the approach that I talked about a second ago, you're further steering your game into what makes them feel challenging, is that you're providing opportunities for the players. You're challenging them to prioritize and to optimize. So again, if you're saying you can't teleport, you can't cast augury, none of that stuff, what you're actually doing is shutting off a lot of space in the design for something that would make it feel challenging, dramatic, and exciting, right? So you don't want to do that if you want to create like a Tomb of Horrors experience where the players feel tense, because you're essentially like robbing them of an opportunity to feel tense, to be put in a tense situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. It's so true that like players are looking at everything that they can do as a resource and something that they want to get a chance to expend. And it is true that if you're cutting off their ability to do that, you're essentially taking away the "is this going to work" question that you want players to be asking. And I feel like that's a huge part of interactivity in a dungeon, is trying as many times as you can to get players to ask, will this work? Should I try it? That's one of the
Yeah,
big cornerstones. So there's no reason to shut that stuff down. You got to embrace it. Yeah.
that's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, okay. What else did you say you had another topic you were going to divert into? I don't want to like derail us with questions in the wrong direction.
I did. I want to be mindful and leave time for audience questions as well. I can't see the chat, so I don't know if there's
Oh,
questions on deck, but I want to be mindful that people get an opportunity to ask.
well, what do we do? Let's do this then. I have the chat, so we'll discuss a little bit more, and then in the meantime, if people have questions, if you want to, just to help me see it, if you want to say it in all caps what your question is, and then enter it into the chat, that'll give us a little bit of time to accumulate some things to talk about. So then we'll jump into that in a minute. So yeah, cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, the last thing I wanted to talk about a little bit that's related to in particular, challenge design, creating dungeons that feel tense and dramatic. And this kind of goes back to the death piece. And you said, hey, you've read through the previous stuff, and it doesn't feel like it's just sort of constantly wailing on you in an unfair way, which I appreciate. That's the goal. Is that one of the things that you can do, and I've been reading a bit more about this recently, is this concept called the partial failure margin, right? So I have up on my screen here the article that I kind of first heard about. It's from 2016, so a little bit older, but it's about stealth games, so stuff like Metal Gear Solid or Siphon Filter. And I think it comes out of a GDC, a 2006 game design conference conference, sorry. And the speaker was like, the problem with stealth games is that there's really only two states the game is in. You're either completely cool and you're hidden, or you're spotted and you're captured or shot and the game is over, right? And what the designer observed is that that's not terribly fun because, and I'm going to paraphrase a quote from the article, the most fun and dramatic moments in a game happen on the cusp of failure. In this partial failure margin. So the talk is about how you can broaden that margin of failure. So there's states between I'm completely hidden, I'm cruising along, and I got spotted and I got captured. And I feel like that can apply to dungeon crawls. And I actually had, speaking of picking something to practice every time, I had a really great time designing the Shadowdark Gauntlet because it was a prime opportunity to practice the partial failure margin, because you can think of it in tabletop role-playing games as the margin being the characters are healthy and they're cruising along, or they're dead / TPK / they lost the adventure, right? And what that results in is a lot of design where it's very damage and condition focused. It's like I have traps and they deal damage and you're restrained, and the monster deals damage and you're poisoned.
Right.
And it doesn't create a whole lot of interesting in-between states where the players feel tense because they failed, but only partially, right?
Right.
And in the case of a gauntlet where characters have between 0 and 1 hit points, basically, when I was designing the Plague Jewels of Sekhmet, which is the most recent one, I was very deliberate, and I'm like, I need to find ways to punish the characters, right? I need to create harmful effects from monsters and traps that aren't just damage, because basically any damage to these characters is going to kill them because they're 0 level scrubs, right?
Yes.
And so for me, it was like digging into, again, widening out the partial failure margin. So in a tabletop game, that would be, what are things I can do to alter the dungeon that makes it scarier, but isn't immediately killing the character? So for example, there's this big central area the players have to move through again and again in the gauntlet where the floor is entirely quicksand. And if they're making checks or attack rolls and they screw up and they roll like a natural 1, they get sucked down into the quicksand, right? And then there are traps and effects where if they screw up, that margin, that roll gets higher, so then it becomes a natural 1 to 3. And because it's a head-to-head, you can actually do it to other teams, where if you find a certain beeswax idol of Sekhmet and melt it, the players at other tables, their instance of the dungeon, it goes up to 1 to 5 for their quicksand, and your quicksand gets stabilized. But think of things that you can do in the dungeon that can present the players with a very clear message that they've screwed up in some way. You can literally raise a danger level. There's an example of that in the module where if they fall into this pit, they don't do any damage, but all of these plague locusts come out from the pit, and it's like, okay, for the rest of the module, the danger level is now deadly instead of risky, right? So there are ways to,
super. It's really, I enjoy that about gauntlet design too, and it's something that I think that when you start sitting down to create them, you realize like it's not just the binary of like damaged or undamaged. Like I guess in a gauntlet it is, but it really does force you to kind of look outside of, I guess, what the low-hanging fruit is that we would always be reaching to, because it is easy. It's easy and it's necessary to have some traps, I guess, that cause damage, and but it's really fun to try to work outside of those maybe boundaries that we might not even realize that we're imposing on ourselves. Like we almost immediately leap to what a trap should do because that's how traps are supposed to be, right? But when you think about it in such a way where you're like, how can I find this boundary between the expected outcome and not. It's just so cool to explore that territory of doing things in a slightly different way. And yeah, I'm so curious. I'm so excited to see more about like what you're doing with that gauntlet. I haven't yet had a chance to finish reading it, so that's like next on my list. But I'm like, ooh, this is good. Everybody should check it out.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I played it with my cousins a couple weeks ago, and they were losing their mind. And they there's a time limit, of course, and they won with like 3 minutes to spare. It's
Oh,
like, yeah.
dang. That is so epic.
So
When you're
yeah.
playtesting stuff like that, what do you, when you're playtesting, this is actually a really interesting thought. Do you worry or like find that you're like, oh man, this is too harsh, or this is like, because strangely enough, I don't often find that things are too harsh in playtesting. That's very uncommon for me to find. It's usually that I find that things are too easy.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where with practice, you get kind of a better intuition. So typically, with the more recent stuff, I don't have that problem as much. Um, I do, in general, try to start out maybe a little easier, a little softer, and then ramp up if I feel like.
Yeah.
Like I actually did that with one of my first Shadowdark modules, the Lost Caves of the Worm Witch.
Hmm.
In the very first version of it, the DCs for like, yeah. Oh no, there
Everyone,
you
I
go.
have the original
Yeah,
cover as well.
that's awesome. Um, the original version for that, the DCs for like the poisons for like the man scorpion, it was like DC 9 or die. Because I'm like, okay, let me just dial this back. And someone was like, oh, DC 9, that seems a little rough. And I'm like, boom, check this out. And the next version, I bumped it up to 15 or something like that. Because what I was finding is I was watching people stream it, and it was actually way, way less deadly than you would anticipate by reading it.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's perfectly okay to start out softer and then dial it up to your preferred intensity. But
Yeah, that's
yeah,
probably the better way to go rather than have it be crazy and then no one can really even get through the playtest. So, yeah.
yeah, exactly right.
But it goes to show there's so much value in like playtesting. I won't harp on it because I know I've seen a lot of questions come through that I think people want to get answers for. But I think that playtesting is sort of like a diminishing returns process. I don't know if you feel this way about it too, but I think a couple really good playtests get you like 80% of the feedback that you need. And then after that point, it becomes like fussing. This is just me. I don't know if you find this to be true too. But I'm like, if I playtest something more than a couple times, then it's just me being like fussy with it and needlesome and not actually really improving it any longer. So I'm always curious how other people do their playtesting.
Yeah. Well, my background, I don't do this for a career, which I'm not sure if I said up front. Like I have a regular day job that I really love. I do all of this on my own time, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But in my day job, I work as part of a user experience office. And so we do things like usability testing, user experience testing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you'll learn if you look in the literature about UX, they say the very same thing about user tests and usability tests. Like some groups will be like, we did 20 usability tests, but what you find is after like 2 or 3, you've basically gotten all the good feedback you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And anything beyond that, you're just kind of wasting everybody's time. And I think the same is true for play tests. Like, you really only need like a couple to really suss out like 80% of your problems. And then the rest you can kind of just go, okay, I can just accept that maybe there might be a corner case. That's what it's perfectionism is what it is. Like, oh, maybe there's a corner case. Maybe the 20th play test is going to dial in on this issue, but maybe there is something hiding in the corner. There's some weird interaction that makes things a little odd. And it's like what I said earlier, you just dare to be bad. Like there may be things that are rough edges, and I've not found that it really turns people off to the degree where it's like, I'm never playing this module again.
Exactly. Same.
Yeah.
It does line up with your part. I'm glad to hear that my like crazy way of doing things is actually like somewhat lines up with the literature and stuff. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that it's so true that letting things exist after a certain amount is kind of what you have to do if you want to move forward. So,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. Well, okay, I saw a lot of questions come through. So, Sersa, if you're okay with this, could we throw a couple at you and see what people are asking?
Yeah, let's do it.
Got it. Okay. Well, okay. So the first one I'm seeing from Danny K, which actually I think we talked about a little bit. But what would you encourage an utter novice at game design, and maybe in particular adventure design, to do to get started?
That's a good question. Would in terms of design, publishing, all of the above, um, I probably would tell them to just start. I think there's an impulse a lot of people have to like they don't want to put something out until it's perfect. They maybe even hear someone like me talk and it's like read this book and this theory and this kind of thing, and that can be kind of overwhelming. But honestly, I would just say just start. Like sit down and just create an adventure. Maybe pick one thing that you want to practice. Like, okay, there's this whole constellation of things that if you're just starting out, it's like, how do I do monsters? How do I do traps? How do I do just block that out as best you can. Maybe pick like one element you're passionate about. So for me, it's like traps are kind of my brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but someone else might be, you know what, I really like NPCs, or I really like environmental storytelling or magic items. I think it's cool. I want like a magic sword is cool to me. Um, and just do, a little bit of reading, maybe Google around and see what other people, like yourself have said about magic item design, and just try to worry about that one thing in your module. Do everything else, the way you normally would do, with probably just freestyling it or, whatever your process might be at that point. But don't try to like learn everything at once, and don't try to make everything perfect at once. And don't let the fact that it's like, this is my first adventure and I did a little bit of reading about traps, because that's maybe something I want to steer into. So hopefully, I can apply something that I, read online or read in a book. Like Tome of Adventure Design, I think is a great starting point for a lot of people by Matt Finch.
Mm-hmm.
And then put it out there. And what will probably happen is that no one will buy it. And that's okay.
That's okay.
Right?
That's normal.
Yeah. And you might play it with your friends and it might not be exactly what you want, or you might get, somebody who's shitty to you in the drive-through RPG comments.
Guaranteed. Guaranteed.
But yeah, 100%. But the reality is, it's a mountain to climb for sure, right? But what I would say is like, just don't try to take it all in at once. Just try to pick one thing that you think is fun about, what is it that makes you want to be a D&D writer, or an RPG writer rather, sorry. And just practice, and then do another one, and don't worry too much about going back to the previous one and being like, well, now I learned something 6 months later. Never go back. I never look back, right?
I agree.
It's always applying what you learned to the next thing. So I hope that made sense.
That's an excellent answer. And I think too, like I might even add to that, is that I completely agree with Sersa that you don't want to overwhelm yourself with thinking like, oh, I don't have all the techniques and strategies, because what we're doing is it is a hobby. For some people it's a job, but it's also a hobby and a craft, and you're supposed to develop. Like you're supposed to invest time into becoming better at these things. And I would really encourage people to take the distilled advice of experts like Sersa, and this is not sponsored or anything. I truly believe that like Sersa's course is an excellent primer, and that's going to put you so far ahead of someone who just doesn't really know where to start, or what information to ingest to get themselves down the right path. Honestly, someone could take your course and then just become a game designer and just build from there and have an entire platform. And it's we're at the point now where we have experts who have kind of been able to distill the process down for people and take advantage of that. Take advantage of their knowledge and their hard-earned expertise. I wish I'd had your course when I first started writing.
Yeah, me too.
Oh gosh, right? Right? Yeah. Oh, well, okay, more questions. This is just me. Someone's like, "What drew you to Shadowdark?" I'm like, "Oh, tell me how great it is." No. But I appreciate so much that you're writing for Shadowdark, and I think that your talents and abilities are just such a wonderful example for the game of ways to leverage the systems. And I don't know, it's just when you design a game and then someone of your talent, Sersa, is writing adventures for it, it makes me feel very good.
I appreciate that. Well, I'm going to send that positivity back to the commenter. I could talk about the mechanical reasons, like, BX is my favorite version of Dungeons and Dragons, and Shadowdark fits into that milieu. But I'll be honest with you, like a big reason that I really enjoy writing for Shadowdark is because it's probably the nicest chillest community I've ever encountered. Like I used to write for other systems and I've literally stopped writing for them because, pardon my language, I could not fucking stand those people. You know what I mean?
Hey, that's true. There are communities of varying acceptingness and niceness out there, and we're so lucky that we have like literally the coolest community. So
Oh
lucky.
yeah. So I'll send that positivity back to the chat. That it's like, one of the reasons that I'm drawn to it is because everybody here is really wonderful. So it makes it very easy to feel motivated to write.
That is so cool. That makes me happy. Ooh, all right, all right. More questions. Um, okay. This is a good question. How do you let your players be storytellers in an adventure that is only a single dungeon? Is it superior to a hex crawl in your opinion? So those are kind of two different questions, but I think the first element there of how do you let your players be the storytellers in an adventure that's a dungeon? I have thoughts. What are your thoughts, Sersa?
Yeah. So as far as the hex crawl thing go, I'll actually say I don't have a tremendous amount of experience with hex crawls. Um, it's something that I want to practice with, right? Like I have actually plans to write one next year,
Cool.
and I don't really know what I'm doing. So I'm kind of taking my own advice, and I've been reading like Justin Alexander's
Yes.
really, really great series about hex crawls, asking friends of mine who are big hex crawl heads, like, crawl heads, what do they like? What do they want?
Yeah.
And I'm going to do the hex crawl, and it's not going to be perfect. It's probably going to be rough because I've never written one before, but hey, that's the process. The storyteller one's interesting because I got two answers for that. The first is I don't really emphasize storytelling that much in my work. So kind of going back to like the MDA framework, the different aesthetics that a game's mechanics can kind of encourage. One of them is like game is make believe, game is storytelling. There's one is like game is expression. So it's kind of like the paper doll aspect. Like when you fire up Dark Souls and you spend 3 hours getting your character just perfect, and like I want the perfect clothes and the perfect makeup. Like for me in Elden Ring, it's like maximum eyeshadow all the time. Give me
Yeah.
more. Um, that's not something that my designs are really meant to encourage in a significant way, right? And I think everybody's designs are going to be focused on different things. That's what's great about the game is that you can grab something that's more story focused that encourages, more character development on over to what is essentially like you're basically playing Descent, the board game, right?
Yes.
When you buy my stuff. That being said, I think there are opportunities to bring storytelling moments into a Death Trap dungeon. In fact, one of the iconic dungeon crawling moments is the role playing prompt. And if you would actually indulge me for a second, in my recent course on trap design, which came out this year, there's literally lesson 8 using traps to present role playing opportunities. Right. So, what you can do is you can create moments of gameplay where the characters are essentially prompted by a trap to answer some interesting role playing prompts. So, an example that I have here, apologize for reading off the screen again. I know that's not very exciting, but so a trap could ask the player to narrate how she endures, avoids, or overcomes the trap, or conversely, ask her how or why she specifically succumbed to the trap's effect. This is one I use a lot, asking the player about one of their character's traits and using the answer to adjust the trap's effects, inflict a condition that kind of forces their role playing to change in certain situations. Things like that, where you're essentially asking the players to just do a little tiny piece of prompted role playing, and then based on their answer, there's some kind of mechanical effect that goes along with it. I'm trying to think of an example from a recent module. I know there's one floating around, but yeah, that's kind of the idea, is that you can find opportunities to present very specific prompts, right? Like let's say there's let me draw from my traps book. I have a book out that's just traps, and there's how could I forget? In Caldera the Sickle Dancer. So there's a trap where you see kind of a character in the party, their skin for the first time, like something happens where they like fall in lava and like burns off their armor. And the GM is told to ask that character, what's on your skin a tattoo. Describe a tattoo your character has that none of the other characters knew that you had, and then it must fit one of the three categories: love, war, or faith. So it's like the reason you got it was like, oh, I got it because it was a war tattoo. And then depending on what they describe, what they pick, that then has some like mechanical impact on the rest of the adventure, right? I think that's the way it's set up. But that's kind of an example. It was really rough because I'm, not totally remembering. The book came out a while ago, but
You
yeah,
have
essentially it's something like that. Yeah.
prompted, yeah, I think that's ingenious. I actually was just like in Shrine of the Jaguar Princess, you have um, like this really ingenious prompted role playing because role playing doesn't have to just materialize out of the ether. A lot of times it's assisted by prompts, and when you work those into the game, like Sersa does, it really it is such a rich way to get characters to sort of start developing themselves a little bit, and like especially when it rewards them or has a mechanical impact. I think that's just such a wonderful skill set that you have, Sersa, that you bring into your work. And like one example from the Jaguar Princess is that the characters start off with vices, and those come into
Yeah.
play, and they're asked to explain or respond to or use their vices throughout the adventure. And so I can almost hear my players coming up with explanations for what the vices are more specifically and why their characters have them and how they're using them. And so I think that kind of prompting is so valuable. And it's that combined with the other moments of the adventure are what creates the story in a way.
Yeah, and I think it can be easier for a lot of players to role play in the first place when it's presented this way because I see a lot of the times for role playing, you're kind of just putting the spotlight on a single person and then asking them to like ISO, like to just monologue for a while. And that can be very, very challenging to kind of just conjure up interesting role playing out of nothing. But, in my mind, it's true in fiction too. Like you learn about the characters like when they're in the thick of it, right? I'm
Yeah.
not super concerned about like, tell me about your character and give me like a 3-page printout of your backstory. I don't care. Where I really want to see your character shine and come through is, when she dodges the boulder trap, and I asked that player, why specifically was your character able to do that? What is it about your background, your training, the way that you were acting in this situation that's uniquely you that allowed you to do that? And I feel like that's a much stronger characterization, and it's easier for players to wrap their head around because you're not asking them to conjure up from nothing, an entire novella about their character. And then for me, designing more challenge oriented play, it gives me space in the design to take their answer and then broadly categorize it and then use that to have some mechanical effects elsewhere. So I think an example, and let's see here, in the course was like, okay, an example of this would be a character gets stung by like a scorpion trap. Like they try to mess with the treasure and a little scorpion comes out and stings them. And in the course it goes, consider asking the player, okay, they conk out for like a second and they have this horrible venom dream while they're spasming unconscious from the poison. And you ask that character, describe for me, you see the Pharaoh Queen and you see her bodyguard. What frightening weapon is the bodyguard wielding? And then after that little like role play, or even you can consider it like giving the characters agency over the story for a second, you then make that real. So then later in the adventure, it says when they get to the Pharaoh Queen and see her bodyguard, he has that weapon, right?
Cool. I love it. I
So
love it.
yeah, so you gave the players an opportunity to participate in the storytelling a little bit to shape the world, and it became reified. Like it was like, oh, now that's actually part of the module.
Awesome. Oh, I love that. All right. Well, I feel like we could talk about that particular question forever. So let's do another one if we have a little bit of time still. Sarah, I don't know how long we have you for, but I guess probably like an hour and a half is a clean. We'll try to aim for an hour and a half. So we've got about
That sounds
15
good. Yeah.
more minutes, I think. One person is asking. Okay, so Matthew Evans asked, how do you spur your players to take meaningful action without them feeling like you're rushing them? That's a really good question. Like, how do you find that balance between incentivizing players and making them feel like they're actually rushed or being punished or something?
So I have two answers to that question. I have a kind of a jerk answer and then a real answer.
Yes.
So the jerk answer is I want the players to feel rushed.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's at least from my specific brand. That's kind of the idea, is to create this feeling of anxiety and time pressure. Like,
Yes.
and that's feedback I get from my players a lot, like in a good way, where they're like, it's really stressful to play with you. You know, um, I guess I'm trying to think about how to answer that first part of the question. Because I mean, we can talk about rewards and incentives. Like that's something that Jeff Warrender talks about. And you said this would be fun, the book I mentioned earlier, where he presents these axioms of game design. And one of the axioms of game design that he describes is that you should design with incentives, right? And that has this phrase I love called your scoring design is your game design. So what that means in the context of like tabletop RPGs is the behaviors that your game or your module rewards, those are the behaviors that the players will sort of flow into, like water downhill, right? And so when I am, for me, thinking about what are the behaviors that I want the characters um, to do, the things I want them to do in the module, or if I want to entice them into certain situations, I just think about the rewards that I can communicate to them, right? There's another great book called An Architectural Approach to Level Design. It's by Christopher W. Totten, Totten, 2 T's, yeah. And he breaks down different kinds of rewards, which I have a course about as well. I feel like I'm just like, it's all SpawnCon today.
No, but I mean, it's true. You do talk at length about these ideas in your stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's 4 different kinds of rewards that they identify in the book. Rewards of facility, which are like, I get new powers, new abilities that let me take on challenges I couldn't before. Rewards of sustenance, so that's like healing, armor, like keeping me in the game. Rewards of access, so it's like I've got this key and I can get to this place now that I couldn't before. And then one that's often underutilized are rewards of glory. So they're things that have no mechanical benefit most of the time, but they make the players feel badass. So that could be titles, that could be monuments. In the gauntlet I just wrote, there's an actual certificate I designed you can print out for characters. So if they survive, you can like print it out and sign it, and they can frame it and stuff like that. And typically your rewards should fit into one or more of those categories. I'm super simplifying it, but basically, as I mentioned up front, like there's a whole universe of process just for rewards that I use. Hopefully that helped. I think I kind of got scattered there for a second.
No, I think I agree with your answers entirely, where I'm kind of like rushing. I also agree is I want there to be time pressure because that's what creates drama. And it's, you know, you don't want the characters to be able to sit there. Sometimes you do, but like more often than not, I don't think you want your characters to have all the time in the world to meticulously plan their every action, because that by nature is a little boring.
That's right.
But, well, yeah, okay. So I think that was a great question. Let's see what else we have. Someone asked, and you just kind of talked about this, do you signpost stakes and consequences? Do you hint at it or spell it out concretely? So that's an interesting question. Do you always do it the same way, Sersa? Do you like always signpost, like do you keep certain dangers and risks hidden from the players, or are you very communicative normally about what the inherent risks are, what they're doing?
Yeah. I mean, in almost all situations, I'm very transparent, almost to the point of not breaking the fourth wall. But I guess the way to describe it is that when I run modules, it often feels less like we're in this like actor mindset where I'm only describing the 5 senses. But I'm working on an article about this right now, actually, called Game Show DMing, where I think of myself more as like Gordon Ramsay and MasterChef, where I'm constantly like, this is the challenge, these are the stakes, this is how much time you have. In some of the books I mentioned, there's another one, I feel like such a dope, it's like the 19th book that I've referenced.
No, this is awesome.
But they're all very great. This one is called Players Making Decisions by Zack Hiwiller. And he breaks down a number of different choices in games. And in fact, if you get into literature, they say that games are essentially just a series of choices that you make to reach an outcome. What's important about choice for it to be meaningful or to be dramatic or exciting or challenging is that the players have to know the stakes. They have to know the options so that they can do the dramatic work of weighing those trade-offs, right? Because if the characters don't know, the players don't know what's at stake, what their options are, the pros and cons of each choice, you lose all of the drama of that, right?
Yeah, it's the
And
idea.
so, and the way that I often think of it is that when I'm DMing, I'm more like reading a choose your own adventure book to the characters, where it's like they get to this point and I will, even if their characters wouldn't know it, I say, this is what you're up against. This is the mystery box challenge, right? And this is the role that you need, or this is the DC you're going to have. And essentially you're setting the stakes, because that's where the tension comes from. The tension is not from, it's a common mistake I see people make. The tension is not from withholding information. That often results in a play experience that's kind of muddled or non-dramatic or confusing, right? The stakes are, or the fun is laying out the stakes so the characters know, like, oh shit, like we're in this situation and we have to weigh these different options. And that can be very, frightening when you combine it with a time pressure, right? So
Yeah. That's such a great point. I agree, and I do this too. I think it's the whole notion of if a tree falls in a forest, no one hears it. Did it really fall? Well, if the characters don't know what the outcome or the stakes are of what they're doing, does it even really? Is it actually a choice, or is it really dramatic?
right.
And it's a notion too of, like there's the characters who are in the game, and then there are the players who are the audience of the game, and the audience in a suspense movie can see the killer walking towards the main character, and they're feeling suspense because of that. And if they didn't get to see that window that's not available to the characters, then they wouldn't feel any drama. So be more transparent with everything. I say, like, tell the players exactly what's at stake and how they can achieve it. That's my thought.
Oh no, I'm with you there.
Nice. Thank you. All right. Well, we have a couple more, like maybe about 10 more minutes. Let me skim through here for some more questions. Oh, well, okay. Let me see if we've got some. There was a design one. Do you know about, for generating, yes. Ricardo's asking, do we know any like roll tables or any mechanical processes to generate adventures automatically? And I would actually say we talked a little bit about this in the frameworks discussion earlier, where you can start to develop for yourself or use frameworks that experts like Sersa have developed to kind of create your way through an adventure, right? Like, I guess we're kind of retreading that same discussion, but Sersa, do you have any sources outside of the ones that you often use that you sometimes go to for generation ideas? Like,
So there's what I use for my dungeon layouts and the general flow chart. I did write an ebook about it, but I didn't come up with it, so I guess this counts. There's a game designer and games researcher named Joris Dormans, who probably best known for his indie games Unexplored and Unexplored 2. They're kind of like dungeon crawler roguelikes. And for Unexplored 1, he wanted to create kind of a handcrafted feel for the levels that were completely randomly generated, right? And so he came up with this concept called cyclic dungeon generation, where I can point people to the doc for the real deep dive, but the gist of it is that there are these patterns in dungeon layouts that are really, really common. He looked at a lot of like older school D&D modules, but also looked at video games. And these patterns are things like the lock and key cycle, or the dramatic cycle, which is like, in a video game where like, oh, I can see that item, but I can't get to it yet. And then later I'm going to move through danger and find a way. And I pop out like, oh, I'm here and I got the thing, right? I mean, there's a whole big list of those. And for his video game, that's how the dungeons are built. It's completely random. And I took that process and applied it to tabletop. So Shrine of the Jaguar Princess, that entire layout was procedurally generated by taking these kind of compact cycles and nesting them randomly within each other to create a space that feels human designed, even though the layout wasn't human designed. It was a roll table, but You know what I'm saying? Like it was procedurally generated.
Yeah.
Um,
That document you have is so wonderful in explaining the process. Everybody should check that out. Is it on your itch? Is that where people can get it?
yes.
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
So worth checking out. It's a wonderful process for creating really organic feeling dungeons. Like I wouldn't have known that you used that for Jaguar Princess. It's so cool to know that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you said that because I anticipate one of the things that people might think when they hear, okay, there's all these processes and, you're kind of just like, you've got these charts and you're basically using a formula, right? And you hear that a lot because I do and teach fiction stuff too. And for newer writers, they might see, oh, well, there's a plot structure. I don't want to use a plot structure because that's just going to make my story feel like everyone else. And the best response I heard to that was, well, every human being pretty much has the same skeleton, but there's infinite variety built on top of that skeleton. I think it was Christine Catherine Rush who said that.
Wow.
But that's the thing. That's the thing here too. Is like you have these essentially patterns, right? Patterns of dungeon design, patterns of adventure design, frameworks that you can use, formulas. But all they're really giving you is the skeleton. And where your creativity comes in, where the real work comes in as a designer, is taking these elements, some of which, like if you do it randomly, like I do, make no sense when they get combined. And so it's like, how the hell am I going to make these things work together? And that's actually where the most interesting and memorable design happens, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, as far as a process that start to finish, like you press a button and it gives you like a PDF, I don't think something like that exists, and it probably wouldn't be very entertaining to publish or play. But I guess I don't want to pitch my own stuff again, but my online courses you can get to through tridentgamebooks.com. That's my main website. Um, they've got tons of things like this for like all the different processes, and that's what I do. I sit down and I just randomly roll pretty much everything and then make it, good.
Yeah,
So
there you go. And I feel like for that, it seems like that process takes care of the things that people get stuck on. Like, how do I move forward?
100%.
How do I make these things kind of connect to each other? And then it really
Hmm.
frees you up to do the incredibly creative things like, I mean, Sersa, I don't know if anybody comes up with like the most creatively cool stuff. Is you like a twin beholder with like a shared central
Hmm.
eyeball that's like dripping like gold tears and stuff like how do you get those elements for your game? Like what do you do to like generate such absolutely fascinating and unique, really iconic aesthetics?
I appreciate that. I mean, some of it is the process. Like you just end up with unusual combinations. Like a lot of the process that I use is deliberately tuned so that you're combining things together, right? And you'll often get things that absolutely don't match. Pardon me. And so it's like I'm gonna merge it together. I mean, part of it is also just sort of inspiration. Like I think like a lot of designers very much inspired by music, by art. Um, and then I try to do. I don't know if I mentioned it yet. There's a fiction writer, Kate Wilhelm. She has this really amazing thing called Kate Wilhelm's Law, and basically it boils down to throw away your first three ideas. Now she's talking about fiction, which is like, okay, throw away your first three ideas because those initial ideas the reader's going to expect, right? Because in the fiction world, they'll tell you that to keep readers engaged, you have to just give them something a little different. Not so different that it's like like I'm reading a fantasy book. I don't want something to like take me out of the fantasy, but putting a twist or giving the player something new that they haven't expected. And so what I do, like when I sit down and design things for like Jaguar Princess, just before this call, I was working on the notes for the design diary. And there's the poison gas, right? Because in Hidden Shred of Tomoe-chan, there's the poison gas that fills the whole lower level. And, the first idea, the obvious choice would be, okay, well, I'll just have them roll every 3 turns, every 3 calling rounds to see if they take damage. And I'm like, Kate Wilhelm's Law, I'm going to throw that away. What's the next idea? Throw that away. And instead of doing, make a con check every 3 rounds or take 1d6 damage, there was this like token system where there's a mini game where the DM plays with the players of like, you're getting poison gas tokens. You can spend poison gas tokens to create effects. And then that opens up space in the design where I can create traps and effects that give me tokens, or I can reward the players by taking tokens away, discarding them. But yeah, that's what I would recommend people do as well is when they're designing their adventure, just think of Kate Wilhelm's law and maybe not throw away your first three ideas because that's a lot of thrown away work, but just go, okay, what's the obvious play here? What would the players expect? And just do something just a little bit different. Does that make sense?
I love that idea. That's and it really keeps you from falling back on familiar things that like, because all of us kind of have weaknesses as writers where we kind of fall back on these particular tropes or design styles or ideas that we might not even be aware of. So that's a really good way to break that habit and to dig deeper into what's interesting about something. I love that.
Yeah. And if I could speak candidly before we get to maybe the last question, because we're all friends here. I've been playing for a long time. I've been writing for a long time, and I've seen a lot of modules. And when I don't like a module, it's not because I have run into situations where it's like super unbalanced or it's, like mechanical stuff is all screwed up. The number one reason that I put down a module and don't play it is because it's bland. And that's the number one problem, honestly, I see with a lot of stuff that comes out is that it's not like bad from a mechanical standpoint, at least, not offensively so. It's just like what I do when I read a module, to be honest, I skip the background, skip everything, and I go to the first room. And if the first room has something in it that grips me or is a little unexpected, then I'm like, okay, I'll keep reading. It's kind of the equivalent of standing in CVS when you're waiting for your pills and grabbing a book and reading the first couple of pages. And like, oh, this seems kind of cool. I'll throw it in my bag. But yeah, that's probably one thing I would say to people is like, at least from my experience, it's being bland that I think really kills modules more than like, oh, I got the DCs wrong, right?
I so agree. It's one of the things that's so fun about reading your modules is that I'm like actually cackling while I'm reading them because I'm like, this is so creative, like I've never seen, and it's like room after room with your designs. I'm like, wow, you can tell that you invested so much effort into really going beyond the expectations of what people are going to find. And they're a delight to read. So
I appreciate that.
It's so cool. It's so cool. And I guess, well, maybe as the last question, I think we've answered the chat's questions for the most part, but maybe the last question before we end is, how did it feel to win an ENNIE for this adventure, Sersa?
Oh my gosh. I mean, the honest answer for me, I'm not a big awards guy, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I appreciated it and I understood kind of the doors it can and has opened. I've definitely seen some more freelance work come my way. But I don't know, for me, I'm always just trying to be better. Like, I don't want to like get the award and then just kind of rest on it and be like, well, I'm done. I know everything now. Like, I don't feel that way at all. And to go back to the writing workshop I was talking about earlier by Dean Wesley Smith, he harps on this in every workshop he does. And I agree with it is the second that you think you're done learning as a creative, that's when you're dead. Yeah. Right. And so for me, it's like, yeah, I've had nominations, I've won contests, and I have the solo ENNIE now. But for me, like, okay, cool. I appreciate that. That's, a nice resume bullet point. And, and I want to give my thanks to, folks like you who helped signal boost it and kind of made it happen. But I can't see it as any kind of like indicator that I am done learning or that I'm perfect. For me, it's like, okay, let's put it in. I have a nice little box I put it in and it's packed up somewhere. And it's just back to work, back to learning. Every single module, as I said, is a learning experience, the practice session. So hopefully it was a satisfying answer.
It is. I think that's how an Olympian would answer too. They'd be like, I didn't do it for the medal. I did it because I love this.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. My parents did tell me that I should like wear it out to like just out in public and like cut in line at Dairy Queen and be like, look, I'm an award winner. Like, I can't be waiting for blizzards. I got places to be.
Do you see this glinting in the sun? Yeah. That's,
Do you know who I am?
I know. Oh, my God. Oh, man. Well, that's the most admirable and true-hearted response. I love it. And I guess everybody, we should probably wrap our stream because we've been on for about an hour and a half. We had the fewest tech issues ever. I think it's because Sersa has magical powers. And I would love to have you on again as you're doing more work. Yeah. And I feel like we're being mega sponsored, but I could not encourage people more to check out both your educational material and your writing. I learn something from your material every time I read it. And I wish other people the same glorious experience when they read it as well. So everyone, thank you, Sersa. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm
Yeah.
glad I could be. Hopefully, this is helpful to folks. I'm on the Discord. I don't post a whole lot, but feel free to DM me. I'm in the Shadowdark server if you have questions or even want me to look at something that you've worked on. Like I said, I don't talk a whole lot on there, but I'm happy to provide, help. I lurk a lot, so I do see what people are doing.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah.
and yeah,
Awesome. All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to play our little end credits and we will end our stream. So thanks, everybody. See you
thanks,
later.
folks.
Bye.